How's it going, everyone? Dylan here from All You Can Board, and today we are talking Frosthaven. Now, if you don't know, I am a huge fan of Gloomhaven. Carlo is as well. We had a campaign with a group of 4 people, 2 of us and 2 of our friends, that lasted for 2 years right before the pandemic kicked in. We were actually 2 scenarios away from finishing the Forgotten Circles campaign, and our entire group had lasted that entire campaign for 2 years. The pandemic hit, we haven't been able to gather, and this coming week we're going to be finishing up that campaign, long overdue. Finally get it done. And Frosthaven is obviously on the horizon. Now, all indications are that Frosthaven is probably not going to be arriving to most of us until early 2022, so we still have a bit of a wait. That being said, we have received a ton of really cool information of all the different changes and new things, new features that are coming to Frosthaven, and I'm so excited that I couldn't not make a video about it. My original plan, I thought that Frosthaven was going to be potentially launching in September, October, so around this time, we were going to be cranking out a whole bunch of Frosthaven content and continuing that throughout the year, including class guides and all this kind of stuff. Now that we have a bit more weight, I thought, well, I guess I have to delay all my Frosthaven content, but rather than do that, I thought I would just jump in and talk about some of the things I am most excited about with Frosthaven, the things that are getting me, just having me itching to play, and I just can't wait to get it into my hands for some of these reasons. So I'm going to go over all these 5 things. There's 5 things in total that I'm really excited about, but believe me, I had to whittle this list down. There are so many exciting things. So what I tried to do is I limited this to some of the more newer things that we found out. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff that came out when the campaign was on Kickstarter in and of itself. Things like the way the new town of Frosthaven, or the settlement of Frosthaven, is going to work, and you can upgrade the buildings. The new loot system. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we've covered actually a little bit in an article on our website, and a lot of it is just sort of common knowledge. So we have got a whole bunch of new information through Kickstarter updates and different places where information has been released. So I thought I'd limit it to some of the newer things that we got. And it just so happens that some of those are the things I'm most excited about anyways. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. We're going to jump right into it. We're going to go over 5 things that I'm really excited about with Frosthaven that you maybe don't know about, and talk about them for a little bit. And hopefully I'll get you as excited about it as I am, so that I can share in that excitement with someone else. So let's jump into the first one. All right, the first thing I'm going to talk about that I'm super excited about for Frosthaven is actually something that was present in Gloomhaven. We're just getting a whole lot more of it in Frosthaven, which is a common theme with a lot of these things. Not on this list, but just in general with what we're getting in Frosthaven. And that is secret envelopes. So if you played Gloomhaven, you'll know that the game comes with these envelopes inside that are secret envelopes, and you don't open them until specific things instruct you to open them. And so in the meantime, they sit there and they taunt you, and you wonder what's inside, and maybe you just aren't good with secrets and you crack them open early and break all the rules. I don't know. But for us, they just sat on the shelf, and we just looked at them wondering, when are we going to be told to open this, and what in God's name are in these envelopes? And I think that there were 3 in the Gloomhaven box. Now, we have been told recently that in the Frosthaven box, we are actually going to be getting 17 unlockable envelopes. So from 3 to 17. Now, obviously, they haven't given us any details on that. They go out of their way to say no comment and don't speak any more to it. But the fact that we're going from 3 to 17 unlockable envelopes is super exciting to me, because it's just one of those, it's that little it's the bait on the hook that's just sort of enticing you to keep on coming towards it. It's on your shelf, it's in the box, wherever it is, and you know that it's there, and you know that you're gonna open it at some point, and you can't. It's this nagging feeling on what is hiding in this envelope. Is it something huge? Is it something small? Is it a sticker we're gonna stick somewhere? Is it something for one of my characters? Who knows? The fact that we're going from 3 to 17, it means that it's just going to be so exciting to open these things up more often. There's gonna be more things that trigger them. There's gonna be some that sit there longer than others, and we wonder why we haven't found the way to unlock them. It's something that brought our group together. The speculation, the fun. They as soon as you find something that says open this envelope, it's this big moment that we all are wondering what's inside. The fact that we're gonna get to do that 14 more times than we did in Gloomhaven is super exciting to me. I can't wait to open them up with my friends and find out what's inside. So that is number 1. Let's jump into the next one. All right, next up are the brand new designs for the character ability cards and the character mats, and just how they've redesigned the entire thing to make it more concise, to make it easier to read, and just like it just looks a lot more beautiful in my opinion. So obviously this has less to do with gameplay and more just in terms of the flow and how you're going to be reading these cards and getting through using your abilities. But I just have to point this out because of how amazing I think the new designs look. So I'm going to throw up some of the old designs for the original Gloomhaven. You can see what we've been working with for the past 2 years, and there's nothing wrong with them. I've never had any complaints on it, aside from it being at times a little bit bland after you've played through them for a while. But Now I'm going to throw up some of the new ones. So you're going to see just how much work they put in to making these a lot nicer to look at, but just more concise in terms of everything. So I'm going to explain a little bit of what's going on here. We're looking at some of the ability cards here, and you'll notice that now things like, gaining experience or, a card being a persistent effect and staying in play are now being relegated to the bottom right-hand corner of the ability section, whether it's the top or the bottom. So rather than it being, in the center of the card, taking up room there, things that happen after a card is resolved are all going to be in the corner. So after you've resolved the ability, you just consult the corner of the card and carry out any of the icons that are there. Speaking of icons, a lot of the card text has been reduced. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword. I love it, but even Isaac notes in the in the update article where this stuff came out that it does potentially lead to some extra confusion because we don't have a lot of card text. Rather, it's just all icons, and you have to be a little bit familiar with the Gloomhaven system and how things play out to get it at first glance. I don't think that's going to be a huge deal because I have a feeling that a lot of people are coming from Gloomhaven, from Forgotten Circles, from Jaws of the Lion, and then now jumping into the Frosthaven box as their next step in that world. If Frosthaven happens to be your first step in that world, however, it's not like the rulebook isn't going to help you and there's not going to be guides. It's not going to completely let you just, be in the dark and not understand this iconography. It's just, I think it makes the card text a lot clearer, a lot cleaner, and it's just a lot nicer to look at. So for example, looking at Transfer of Essence here, you'll see that normally for this top ability, we would have had something that said, strengthens an ally within range 3. You'll notice for the poison one, it would normally have said poison enemy within range 3 or something to that effect anyways. There would have been a lot of text that really is unneeded when you understand how abilities function in Gloomhaven and Frosthaven. That's all been now contained with iconography on a single line. So at the top here, you'll see that this ability says one ally within range 3, and the range is contained within this ability, and the one ally is just, that's all they have to really put in terms of words, one ally. So it's a lot easier, it's a lot cleaner, I should say, and it's pretty easy to understand. I would say that any confusion from this is going to be in the initial stages of just learning, sorry, what does this icon mean, or what does this mean again? Once you do it, get through a couple scenarios and use your abilities multiple times, it's going to be like learning a language. It's going to be reading off the page, no problem. I like that they've done this. I think it's really, really great. And I think it's just something that's going to help the cards be cleaner and allow for more stuff to fit on the cards. There were some cards that just had a lot of unnecessary text taking up their box. So that's one thing I love about this. Another one that I'll mention, this is a minor one maybe, but obviously it was a big enough issue that they decided to address it, which makes me feel good and a little bit validated because I thought it was just our group constantly making the same mistakes over and over again, but clearly we are not the only ones. So I'm talking about the persistent bonuses. So if you look here on Life and Death, the bottom ability has this persistent bonus. You'll put your character icon on the circles and they'll move across the circles as certain effects happen or certain things are triggered. They have addressed one, I guess, issue where sometimes people would not know where your circle starts and when it is considered to be done. Is it when it reaches the last box that then it's removed, or does it have to, move off that circle to be removed? There was a bit of confusion there, I guess, which is, like I said, makes me feel a lot better because our group made this mistake very often. They've cleaned that up a little bit like that with the dotted line circle being where it starts, indicating that the arrow at the end is red instead of green when it pushes off that last spot. Then the experience triggers that you see above it. Like they've just done a little bit to sort of make that a little more obvious for people like me and people like our group that make that mistake over and over again. So I really appreciate that they're thinking of us for that. Next thing I want to draw your attention to is the summons on these cards. So let's look at Life and Death here, for instance. Look how much nicer this looks to this other card I'm going to throw up here, which is a summon from the original Gloomhaven. The fact that they've now included summon art on these just makes it so much nicer. It's just it's super, super clean the way it's all designed here on the card. It just looks a lot better. I love it. It's an aesthetic touch only. It's not like this is affecting gameplay, but it's something that I appreciate. It's going to be so much nicer to look at these cards, to get a visual of what these summons look like too. I love it. I think it's really great. Just one thing I want to let you guys know. Another thing that I think is really, really important, one of my favorite inclusions, is the mandatory area of cards. So there are parts of ability that are mandatory to carry out, and we see that here on Life and Death. And the way that they're bringing your attention to this is with this little box with an exclamation mark on it that is telling you that this is not something you can skip. This is a mandatory part of the card that you have to carry out to do this part of the ability. This existed in Gloomhaven, but it was less clear and had to just be part of the rules that you were trying to understand for cards that you had to carry out certain things. This being now part of the cards where you can see it with the iconography very clear. This is something you have to carry out is really, really great. I love it. Again, it's an aesthetic thing. In this case, it's closer to a gameplay thing because it's going to prevent you from making mistakes that could make your life harder or easier. I'm really glad they included that. Just from the two cards you're looking here, you can see how much different this looks from original Gloomhaven, but yet still keeping the same essence. Like the card functions the same. There's no drastic differences in terms of gameplay, but it just looks a lot nicer. And we'll see here, if we look at the Blink Blade, for instance, the Blink Blade is, I guess, one of the more complex I think, complex classes in terms of everything you have to learn and how you're carrying out its actions from these starting classes that are in Frosthaven. Don't worry, this is not an unlockable class, it's a starting class. But you'll see how they've dealt with that. And yes, the cards look a little bit more cluttered than the ones I just showed you, but it still makes complete sense. So the entire idea of the Blink Blade is the Blink Blade can act slow or fast when it's using abilities, and it's going to carry out different things on a card depending if it's acting slow or fast. You'll see here on the ability cards, if it's acting fast, you get these green boxes with multiple arrows, whereas if it's acting slow, it's this sort of like yellowed box, yellow-gray box with one arrow. And on a card, you'll see that it has, on its ability, for instance, if you're looking at Blurry Job here.
What did you just say?
The top ability has two different functions depending on which way you're acting. And same with the initiative too. The initiative is different depending if you're acting slow or fast. But it's pretty clear. Like you look at it and you say, hey, if I'm acting fast, I'm looking at this left side of the card. If I'm acting slow, I'm looking at this right side of the card. And it's clear with the color distinctions, with the box distinction, with the arrow distinction, which one you're doing. I really like how they're dealing with a lot of information and condensing it down. It looks great. It's going to function great. I'm super excited about it. The last thing we're going to touch on is how they've adapted the character actual boards that you get for each character. So in the original, there was a lot of text that was the same across all of them, like generic text to do with rules of the game. They've gotten rid of some of that, and now they're keeping a lot of the text that's on the card more specific to the class, especially if that class has specific abilities that are only present on that class itself. So like for instance, the Blink Blade has abilities that with the slow and fast that are only applicable to the Blink Blade. That is all covered in the class notes now on the front of this board, which looks a lot cleaner. Still has the tokens spots on the board as well, but just now it's a vertical line there, and all the information is portrayed beside it. We'll notice here on the Bone Shaper, the Bone Shaper as well has abilities that are unique to him, and it's covered here as well. On the back side of these boards, really cool, because before I even read the text, I was like, oh man, this really reminds me a lot of Spirit Island. And then he completely calls out that is where the inspiration came from, or it looks vaguely like Spirit Island. So you'll notice that there's this sort of graph now on the bottom that goes over things like melee, ranged, mobility, and ranks them, as well as a complexity score and which elements are used by that class, so that at first glance, without knowing a whole ton about the class, perhaps like when you're deciding which one you want to play, you can look at some of these things and say, I like healing, I like being a support class. Oh, this class has a lot of healing, and you can just sort of gather all that information from this graph on the bottom here and just make your decision based on that. So that's really cool as well. Overall, as you'll see across all these images I'm showing you, it's just so much has been done to refine the design, to make it more pleasant to look at, to make it cleaner, easier to read. That'll all make the gameplay move a lot smoother. And some of them are just necessary changes. Like I said, like the, highlighting what is a mandatory part of your action ability is just a huge addition, and something that, probably should have been in the original, but now I'm glad is here. So overall, this is one of those things I'm super excited about, just because it's going to be so much more pleasant to look at these cards. It's going to make the experience so much more enjoyable, and it's just the next evolution on Gloomhaven. This is the next, it makes sense to do this thing next, because it was something in Gloomhaven that it all functioned right, it all functioned great, but it wasn't necessarily always the most pleasant thing to look at. Now it is, and really what is there left to complain about? So that is all to do with the ability cards and the character sheets. Let's move on to the next thing that I'm excited about. All right, the next thing I am super excited about when it comes to Frosthaven, I'm really excited about this one, are the updates they have made to perks. Now, if you're not familiar or you've forgotten, perks in Gloomhaven were a way to sort of advance your character's attack modifier deck. It was also just a form of character progression. So you would earn check marks, perk marks, to be able to basically unlock things that would modify your attack deck. So your attack modifier deck. So basically, it would allow you to remove negative cards, negative ones, negative twos from your deck. You would add in additional +1 modifiers. There was ones where you'd add in things that would generate, elements, or add push to cards, things like that. You would basically, every character had their own unique set of perks that they would unlock, and your modifier deck would be customized to your playstyle. And the way I play that character would be different than the way you might play that character, so we could end up with different modifier decks as we go on. The issue with this, and it's addressed here, is that all the characters had these persistent ones that were good across all the characters and was always the ones you sort of went for first. You would get rid of the -1s, you would get rid of some 0s maybe if you want to thin it out, you would add some +1s, you'd add a +2, and you'd spend most of your time doing that, and then after you were done that, at whatever level you've hit at this point, then you'd start getting into some of the more complex ones, or the more interesting ones. But really, they were interesting, but they weren't always... They were just not as good as the ones you just did. So it was always something you're like, I guess I'll do this now. And you get to like the final levels of your character and sort of be like, I guess I'll do this. Or then you'd even have someone at the table say, do I have to take a perk? Can my perk be that I don't take a perk because I like my deck the way it is? Which is never what you want to have with something like this. When you're wanting to advance a character, it should always be exciting. So they've addressed all of this, and the decisions they've made are just fantastic. So I'm going to put up a perk sheet here for the Inox Drifter. And you'll see here, obviously it looks a lot different. There's a lot of stuff going on even beyond the perks. We're only going to talk about the perks today. But the big thing here to note is there's a bunch of categories they've decided to improve. First one being less removal perks. So when it comes to removing cards from your deck, just a straight check mark that says remove a -1 or remove 2 -1s, they've tried to reduce that because it's less interesting design, and it was just always something you gravitated towards for all the characters. So they even mention here that on the starting 6 classes, you'll only see a total of 2 removal perks and 1 instance of remove 2 -1s, which is on the Bone Shaper. So like that is a complete different ball game compared to the original Gloomhaven. It's way, way, way reduced, which is really, really good. And also better pure additive perks. So when it comes to adding 2 +1s into your deck, things like that, they've now, because things like adding push or adding elements is so much more exciting, they've sort of mashed some of these together. So one of the examples they give here is for the Geminate. You have something that is like add 2 add 2 +1 push 3s, right? So you have that combination of, yes, you get new +1s into your deck, which is something you want for your modifier, but now you have this push mechanic that is tacked onto it, and now you're doing some of the more interesting things in the design that might be tied to a character, while still gaining the additive modifiers that you're going to be trying to seek anyways for your deck, but you don't feel like you have to choose that over some of the more interesting design choices. So I really like that they've sort of combined those and give you, the edge of increasing your modifier deck, but also the more interesting design. So also with replacement perks, this is when you replace a certain modifier that's in the deck, like a -1 with a 0 or a -1 with a +1, things like that. There's lots more of them, but they're sort of tied. I'll just read this thing here because he does a way better job of describing it than I do. But it says they've hit the sweet spot. Replacement perks: strictly removing modifiers is often too good, and strictly adding modifiers is frequently underwhelming. But the marriage of the two sits perfectly in the middle. So that's the key here, is that rather than you having to spend time doing one, then doing the other, and just knowing that's the way you're going to do it, it's now mashed into one, and it's something that's still very, very powerful, but you feel like you're even getting more out of taking a perk because it's doing both of these things. So, we see on the Inox Drifter that he can 3 times replace a -1 with a +1. So you don't have to remove and then add with another perk. It's just all combined into one. You get to do it all with a single check mark. You can do that 3 times and feel like you're making more progress in your modifier deck quicker, and each of those is a bit of a more interesting and fun decision, a more powerful decision. The most exciting one for me by far is the fact that we have these non-attack modifier deck perks. Now, I believe we had like some of these on a minor level when it came to the original Gloomhaven. Like there was a lot of characters that had the ability to ignore negative scenario effects, for instance, and that was one you always grabbed. But it was pretty much limited to things like that. There wasn't a lot of interesting design space across, like unique to different characters. That is changing here, and some of these are the most exciting ones by far. So again, we're using the Inox Drifter here as an example. You'll notice that when we get done with the modifier ones, you still have ignore negative scenario effects. It's still there. You still have ignore negative item effects. Again, something that was present in Gloomhaven. But the ones beyond that are all brand new, and they're unique to the character depending on what the character's doing. So the first one here, for instance, is whenever you long rest, you may move one of your character tokens back 1 space. That is tied to the Drifter, obviously, but it's something that once you get that, it's going to change the way you're playing the Drifter because you have this new persistent ability. In the next one, you may bring 1 additional item, a hand item, to each scenario. That's going to change how you're buying and equipping your items for your character and what you're capable of doing. Very, very cool. And if you want to play the Drifter and really go heavy into items, or you have an item that you think would really help, you can get this early on and change your strategy compared to how I may have played the Drifter. The last one here, at the end of each scenario, you may discard up to 2 loot cards to draw that many new loot cards. It's going to change the way you loot. Again, it's just these type of things make your character feel more unique and more unique to you, depending on how you play it, depending on how someone's playing it. If they choose to play the Drifter, and character to character, it's going to feel very different. I love that they're including this stuff. They even are including actual cards that you get to put next to your board to remind you of these things. So I'll throw them up here. So like this one, obviously, whenever you long rest, you remove one of your character tokens back 1 space. You have this persistent ability now that sits there with you. Another one they show here that's not part of the Drifter class is once each scenario during your turn, gain 2 armor for the remainder of the round. That is super, super cool. And it's always just this extra perk next to you that you can use. I love that they're including this stuff. I think that this is the next proper evolution of perks. It doesn't always have to be just with the attack modifier deck, and the fact that we're getting some of these is really, really cool. You might have seen here on the Drifter one, the next thing I want to talk about are the multi-mark perks. So we've always had some perks that have multiple boxes to the left and right. It means you can use that perk multiple times. So on the Drifter, for instance, with the top one, you can replace 1/1 with a +1 3 times, and then you won't be able to do it anymore. But now we have near the bottom, the third from the bottom here, we have a perk that has a vertically 2 connected boxes. That means that to unlock that one perk, you have to have put 2 check marks in, which means that putting a single check mark is going to do nothing for you. But next time when you get the second one, now you unlock the ability. That's because they've deemed this more powerful, which means we have the potential to see some really powerful perks that would have been too overpowered in Gloomhaven now make their way into the game, because you can just say, oh, it's going to take multiple perks to unlock this. And then the last thing to mention is that we do get 18 boxes to get additional check marks at the top here, compared to the 15 that were in the original Gloomhaven. So very, very cool stuff. Again, the reason I'm so excited about this is just I'm so big on character customization, and character customization makes it so that the way I play a class will make it different than the way you play a class. And we saw some of that for sure in Gloomhaven, but this is going to make that separation even greater. And I think that that is just opens up possibilities where if you're playing a very long campaign with the same group of people, you can have players take the exact same class and not feel like, oh, we're just seeing a lot of the same stuff that this person did. And we had that happen before in Gloomhaven, where someone took a class that someone already played, and it was like, oh, we have this character back, but they're playing it similar, or even if they're playing a little bit different, we're seeing a lot of the same things. This is just allowing for more customization and, you know, more uniqueness across them. I love it. I think it's great, and I'm so excited to see across all the classes what kind of crazy perks and unique perks they've come up with to make each character play in its own distinct way. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the section book. Now, this is could be a temporary name. He mentions in here that he's not sold on the section book name. Could change even by the time you've chosen to watch this video. But that being said, the section book is a separate book from the scenario book that has 191 entries that you're going to be reading at different points when you're instructed to read from it. Now, it's exciting to have that much narrative content, to have that much content that you know that you're going to be reading entries from as different things evolve and happen in your world. That's exciting in and of its own right. We've seen some of that before. But what's really exciting here, and the reason I'm including it, is how this affects or comes into play with timed events. Now, timed events, if you're unfamiliar, is the fact that in Gloomhaven or in Frosthaven, there's going to be a natural progression of time. Now, when you return from a scenario, for instance, and you return to your outpost, it'll be as if a week has passed. So there's going to be this calendar that sort of tracks the progression as things are moving. So you always feel like you're actually moving forward. And the way this works with the section book is that, for instance, you could return from a scenario, and they use this as an example of how they explain this, and you could have retrieved a really valuable metal, for instance, and you take it to your blacksmith that you've unlocked in your town. And the blacksmith needs a little bit of time to work on this metal to turn it into something, or to see what he can make of it, or whatever the case may be. And normally, you know, you might come back in Gloomhaven from a scenario and gain something, and it would just feel like you could take it on. You could take it on whenever you want. Oh, we got this side scenario. Oh, we got this item or whatever. We're gonna choose not to do this now. We're gonna choose to do this immediately. And sometimes you just ignored the progression of time. Now it might tell you, track this as an item 2 weeks ahead of time on your calendar, that the blacksmith needs 2 weeks to work on this metal. You have to go do other scenarios, obviously, to have that progression happen. And all of a sudden, when your calendar crosses that date, you'll be instructed to go to the scenario book, and the scenario might say, you've gotten word that the blacksmith is finished on your metal. Like, it just makes it this a better feeling, this living, breathing world, and where there's this natural progression of time, and you have to really be aware of what you're doing in your campaign, when and when, like where and when, and there could be this thing, like it opens up possibilities for them to say, if you don't do something by a certain date, you'll lose the ability to do so, and your campaign will differ from someone else's because of that. There's a ton of possibilities, and the fact that it all is tied to this this section book is just super interesting. There's gonna be so many entries you're gonna read, and ones you might never read because of decisions you've made. So other examples they use of when this might come up, for instance, is whenever you draw a random side scenario card. Now, if you'll remember in Gloomhaven, you could draw side scenario cards from all different sources, and they just sort of happened. You would get the scenario card, and if you choose to go take it on, you just read the narrative text, and it's almost as if your group was like, let's go do this. We opened up a chest and we got a side scenario. Sometimes there was a bit of a thematic break on how it all worked out, and you had to sort of fill in gaps yourself, is the way I should word it. It says here that you'll basically, whenever you draw a random side scenario card, now you'll get a little bit of setup to what exactly you found and how that leads to that scenario based on reading different sections in the section book, which makes them tie into your journey a little bit better. It gives them their natural fit in the world. I really, really like that they're doing that. Whenever a character retires, you might read sections from the section book that'll now lead to other events or timed sections in that book, depending on what's happening, which characters retired and when. Very, very cool that they're doing that. Whenever you build a new building in your outpost, you might read new sections from the section book, and that might unlock different things that are now available to you because you have a blacksmith, because you have an alchemist, things like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Whenever you solve different puzzles, you're going to get different 3-digit codes that you can read in the section book to see the conclusion of the solution to your puzzle. There's so much design space here that I think the section book opens up a lot of possibilities and gives them a lot of freedom to do things that otherwise would have been self-contained in Gloomhaven and sort of not felt connected to the overall world. Anything they can do to make this a more cohesive and narrative story, that beyond the main scenarios, that you're just feeling like there's constantly this evolution happening depending on the time of the year, depending on where you are in the calendar, depending on which characters have retired, which buildings you've unlocked in your outpost, which side scenarios you've picked up. I love that everyone's scenario or everyone's campaign could have this different feel to it and just be this complex web that you've made with your friends, and you get to sort of feel like there's always a purpose to everything. I love it. I think it's super cool. So even though this was a section about the section book, it really is what the opportunities are that it presents and all these possibilities that we're hearing about that has me so excited. And the last one is super simple. This isn't going to take me very long to say. I am just excited for how much scenario content is going to be in the Frosthaven box. In the original Gloomhaven, this is a gigantic box. We have 95 scenarios, almost 100 scenarios in this box, and it took me and my group a year and a half or more to get through Gloomhaven before we were even ready for Forgotten Circles, because there was just that much content in here. Even with not having seen every single scenario, we saw so many of them and there was so much to get through. And we left a couple behind because we just wanted to move on to Forgotten Circles. That took us about a year and a half. This was 95 scenarios. Frosthaven currently sits at 138 scenarios. We are getting a Gloomhaven and a half worth of content almost in the Frosthaven box in terms of scenarios, and that's just what currently is sitting in there. I think at one point it was 137, now it's 138. Who knows if they're going to add it even more in, or if there's going to be unlockable scenarios, whatever the case may be. This is just super exciting. Again, Gloomhaven was such an amazing experience for me and my group because it brought us together on a regular basis. I don't want to say it was an excuse to bring us together because we would have hung out anyways, but it was in a way. We had this thing to meet and gather around, to drink beers around, to have snacks around, to have conversations around, to listen to music around, and just really come together and have this goal. It was just such an amazing, in the same way that people have these long extending Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. I'm more of a tabletop physical gamer where I have these things I can tangibly see. And for me, Gloomhaven brought that same experience to the table and really brought us together. And Frosthaven is not only going to do that, it's going to do that with even more content, which means it's going to give us more of a reason to come to the table more often over a longer period of time. That has me excited. Overall, you could almost just say that this item is just more content means more time around the table with friends playing this game. I cannot wait to have it on the table and to receive it in 2022 for that reason alone. So those are the 5 things that I'm most excited about for Frosthaven. Like I said, there are tons of things I could have included on this list. There's more that I'm even potentially more excited about, but we've known for a while. I wanted to keep this some of the newer items that people might not have heard of, and we're learning more every couple weeks. I mean, there's updates coming constantly. I'm sure I'll make more videos like this as we get nearer to the launch, and keep an eye on this channel as we get to the end of the year, because The closer we get to the Frosthaven launch, the more content we're going to have. Carlo has done some content on Jaws of the Lion. He has a nice guide up, an amazing guide, a solo guide for playing that game, as well as a review of Jaws of the Lion. As we get closer to Frosthaven, we're going to have previews of all the starting classes. We're going to have, when we start playing, reviews of what we're playing, some potential playthroughs, potential, experience videos where we talk about like how we've seen things or whatever the case may be. There's so much stuff we want to do. We love this world. It's one of my favorite games. We're going to have a ton of content on the channel. So if you're looking for Frosthaven, Gloomhaven content, keep an eye on here, especially as we get to the end of the year, and you will not be disappointed. We have a ton on the way. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see more Frosthaven content, if you're excited by what I just said, let me know in the comments that it's something you dig and that you want to see more of, because that'll help us incentivize us to do even more of it. Otherwise, let me know what you are most excited about for Frosthaven. What on this list are you most excited about, or what what I did not include on this list, the multitude of things that have been announced for Frosthaven, have you most pumped, that make you disappointed on the slight delights 2022, but also just super excited to actually get into your hands. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.